Well, hello friends, and welcome to Ask Zach. Today we're going to talk about a must-do for any of you guys that are coming to Nashville, and that's you have to go to the Musicians Hall of Fame. Going to talk about why you should go, how the museum came about, and a little bit about Joe Chambers, who the founder of it. That unfortunately recently he passed away, but I just want you to know the huge contributions he's made to musicians, and also musicians being recognized for their hard work. All right. Also, we're going to continue to do Zach's kind of book nook. I think we might call it now. For now, we're going to call it Zach's book nook. And then if I can figure it out, I've got some kind of funky footage of JD Simo and I geeking out over James Burton's guitars that were at the Musicians Hall of Fame this last month for a limited time. And so we geek out over all of the changes that James made to his 69 Paisley and his 52 Telecaster that he painted red and all sorts of colors actually through the years. So yeah, so fun episode. And again, the focus is must do when you go to Nashville, the Musicians Hall of Fame. All right, so while you're thinking about it, if you haven't done it already, please hit subscribe if you've been enjoying the channel. If you've already subscribed, then I appreciate you supporting the channel. The best way is Patreon, and there's a link in the description. There's also a link to askzach.com where you can find out more information, and there's articles that I've written. Also, there's a store where you can pick up t-shirts and other things. Also, there's tip jar information in the description. All right, let's dive in. So I guess first, what I'll say is why I'm doing the video. So just a couple of weeks ago, JD Simo contacted me and he said, we have to go to the Musicians Hall of Fame because they have James Burton's two main Telecasters there. And it was something I knew about, but I just had kind of been lollygagging around. And I had been to the Hall of Fame briefly for an event. So it was kind of an after hours event. It was Gretsch was launching a new model, and they had that kind of after hours, and we got to do kind of a truncated visit to the museum, but I didn't really have a lot of free time. It was kind of like, hey, the event's over, you can go through here, and then you need to kind of move along, because they all wanted to go home. So JD said, let's meet up. And so on a Friday afternoon, we met up at the Musicians Hall of Fame, and when I was able to go through it, and they have a video that it starts off with that's narrated by Dwayne Eddy, and really kind of sets the groundwork for what you're going to see ahead in the museum. And then as we just walked through, and JD and I just kind of gawked at all of the amazing instruments, not just guitars, drums. It was like the drum set that Santana's drummer used at Woodstock is there on display. Also, the drum set that Tom Petty's drummer used all through the 80s and into the 90s was there. Keyboards used by all sorts of session musicians. Joe Osborne, who is one of the kind of the Wrecking Crew bassist besides Carol Kay, he played a jazz bass with a pick. And his jazz bass that he used on thousands of sessions is there on display. And it is beat to hell. Just so many amazing instruments. And it's just instrument after instrument. And so I'm a big Reggie Young fan. And so they had a whole section just dedicated to the Memphis Boys and kind of the guys that were part of that Memphis scene that Reggie was part of, that played on Elvis and Wilson Pickett and all sorts of other records. And they had a whole display just to them, and they had organs and drum sets, and they had a couple of Reggie's guitars. They had the Les Paul Deluxe, with the mini humbuckers that he used for the fills and the solo on Drift Away. And they had the gut string guitar that he played on Elvis's In the Ghetto, and they had the sitar, the choral sitar that he used on things like Cry Like a Baby and other tunes in the 60s. So that was just Reggie Young. And then there's stuff with John Jorgensen and B.B. King and on and on and on. I mean, there is a ridiculous amount of killer instruments, and not just stuff that was just donated by some guy, but these are all instruments and amps, pedal boards, all sorts of things that saw major usage on major tours. They had one of David Hungate, who was the bass player for Toto. They had one of his early pedal boards. And it's just amazing. And just for the fact that you're able to see what early professional, pedal boards, how they were built. And they used some odd connectors and eliminated some of the 1/4-inch cables. And it was really, really interesting. And so JD and I just kept being, just kept being slack-jawed yokels as we went through this thing. And we've seen a lot of stuff. JD and I have both have a lot of experience in the music industry. We've met a lot of people. We've seen a lot of cool instruments. And so that's how cool this museum is. And you really, if you go to Nashville, this is a absolute must do. And, you can spend, if you go quickly, it's about an hour. If you really want to spend a lot of time, it's probably about 2 hours, but it's perfect for doing like a morning thing or an afternoon thing. And then, of course, you could do things like going to the Country Music Hall of Fame or other stuff. But what's really nice about the Musicians Hall of Fame is it is just about the musicians. So the Country Music Hall of Fame is going to be, more about the artists, but they're going to have stuff about players and songwriters and other people involved in that. But the focus of the Musicians Hall of Fame are the musicians and their instruments and telling their stories. And there's such amazing examples of all sorts of guitars, everything from, like I said, B.B. King to Steve Wariner and everyone in between. And they have stuff dedicated to Muscle Shoals. They have some of the Muscle Shoals, like the Swampers instruments. They have stuff from L.A. and New York and Detroit. I mean, there's guys, instruments that were used on Motown records. So probably the the section that might be the least represented might be country music, because again, they're just focusing on all the music that's been made here in the United States. So again, this is a must do. All right, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Joe Chambers. So the late Joe Chambers, who founded the Musicians Hall of Fame, was a musician from Georgia. He moved to Nashville with a band. He ended up becoming kind of a protege of Billy Sherrill, very famous producer and songwriter. Joe got into songwriting, had some success with that, also doing some production, and he opened a music store. His first Chambers Music he opened in 1985. Then as things went forward, he got more and more invested into his music store and ended up opening a couple of locations. So by the mid to late 90s, there were a couple Chambers guitars across the Nashville area. So I remember there being one in the kind of the downtown Nashville area, and then there was one kind of in Franklin where I live, and then there was a location down in Murfreesboro. And interestingly enough, Ryan Wariner, Steve Warner's son, I met when he was working at one of the Chambers guitars, and he was a teenager at the time. But great shop, and he always had little displays of important musical memorabilia that was in glass cases. And I thought, that's really cool. Well, fast forward a number of years, and he starts moving away from the music store focus, and he starts moving toward his dream of having a venue to showcase musicians. And so in 2006, he opens the Musicians Hall of Fame near downtown Nashville. Now, it exists there for a couple of years, and then in 2010, the city of Nashville used eminent domain to take his property. Basically, they forced him to sell. And there was a lot of uproar, and, of course, it was kind of a David and Goliath kind of thing. But the city ended up making it right. So don't get mad at Nashville. The city, what they did was they moved him to an even better location. So the old municipal auditorium here in Nashville had an exhibit hall, and that wasn't being used as much, but the venue itself was still being used, for concerts. So they gave him that. And that's where it's been since 2013. So it's almost 10 years in that location. And they have filled it out well, and it's really, really beautiful. Now, a little bit about the Municipal Auditorium. So the significance of it being in Nashville's Municipal Auditorium is that's where the Stones played back in the 60s. That's where Elvis played. That's where just, Led Zeppelin, act after, if it was a cool rock act in the 60s, they played at Nashville's Municipal Auditorium. So that whole building is just, it is just soaked in music, in memories, and crazy guitar solos and all sorts of things being done there. So yeah, it really brought it full circle to where, you had this precarious situation with Joe Chambers in the museum, and then all of a sudden he was put in the perfect spot. Yeah. So again, I just have to say I'm very sad to hear of Joe Chambers passing. It was just a month or two ago, and my condolences to his family and friends. And I just wanted to do something to support the Musicians Hall of Fame. And so, actually JD bought me this t-shirt when we went there. He ended up treating me to everything. Nice guy. And I hope that you all will go down to the Musicians Hall of Fame whenever you're in Nashville, and you will just find yourself gawking at all of the amazingly cool guitars, amps, keyboards, tape machines, everything you can think of. It's so worth the price of admission. You got to go. All right, now for Zach's Book Nook. This is The Memphis Boys, The Story of American Studios by Robin Jones. This book is for those of you that want to do a deep dive on the American Studios crew, which of course included Reggie Young as the guitarist. This is the story of Chips Moman, who was their leader and who produced and owned American Studios. It's the story of all of the players and the songs that they recorded on, like Elvis's Suspicious Minds, or, In the Ghetto, or, The Box Tops Cry Like a Baby, or so many other, amazing tunes, like The Dark End of the Street, the original recording of that. And their work, the fact that they got to work with, not all of them, but part of them got to, go up to New York and work with Aretha Franklin and others. And this is a fabulous book, and really, the only thing out there that really tells the story. And it's, of course, focused on the time period from the late 50s into the mid 70s, when that scene kind of comes. And it goes on some past that. But that's the meat of the book, is the era when they were recording in Memphis, throughout the 60s and early 70s. Really great book, and especially for those that want to do a deep dive on that musical scene. Very much enjoyed it. All right, guys. So now, if it works out, I'm going to show you some footage of JD and I geeking out at the Musicians Hall of Fame. So now, I'm just to warn you beforehand, the orientation on this is going to be, not, the same, horizontal. So anyway, just take that into account, and then just realize that this is two musicians, two geeks, two guitar geeks, just really geeking out, having a great time. All right, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hey guys, I'm here at the Musicians Hall of Fame, and my friend JD Simo is helping out by filming. And pardon the Elvis clam bake, music that's playing and such, but we're just here and just having to take this in. This is really rare to get to see these guitars. So these, to me, are the two most important Telecasters, of all time, in my opinion. And so this is James's original 52 Telecaster. So if you look at it all, you can see that the frets are gone. They are totally just, they've been worn out. So this is the guitar that James played from 1952 when his parents bought it for him when he was 13 years old. This is the Suzy Q guitar. This is the Fools Rush In. This is Hello Mary Lou. This is Buck Owens' Open Up Your Heart, Let the Sunshine In. This is Merle Haggard, Bottle Let Me Down. This is Working Man Blues. This is early Elvis. This is Wrecking Crew. This is an amazing guitar. It's been refinished multiple times, usually in a red finish that matched whatever car that James had at the time. He really enjoyed having his guitar match his Cadillac. And so this is Coronado Red, and it matched the last Cadillac that he had in the late 60s. So you can see it has a mix of parts on here. You see some flathead screws, you see some Phillips. The saddles have obviously been replaced. That is the original serial number 4590. There's the original flat pole bridge pickup, original neck pickup. The pickguard has been replaced with an early 60s, 8-hole but still single ply. The knobs are,
They look to be mid 50s rather than original.
Yeah.
Because they're more rounded.
Right. And then you have a later switch.
A later switch tip.
Yeah. Now we're getting. Yeah. I'm glad that JD's chiming in too. And talk about what you think about the finish there, JD.
Well, it's just really interesting to see. I mean, because I've seen a handful of guitars that were refinned back in, the 60s or 70s, and it's just very stereotypical of guitars that were refinned back then. Because as you see, like the primer, which a white or flat base primer would be very common. You can see actually on the heel a really good amount of the primer color.
Now this refin was apparently done by Fender.
Done by Fender. Yeah.
So they saw him play it apparently, and he took it there. And when he took it to Fender, he took all of his parts off because he was afraid that they would have replaced the
replaced them,
and the
yeah,
pickups and everything else. So they refinished it, and then they gave him this next guitar.
Which, we'll move over to that.
Yeah.
This is just, it really is crazy. Tell them about the frets, though, the reason why.
The frets are completely worn out because James was very old school and kind of going along with Leo Fender, and that he kind of felt like when the frets were worn out, it meant it was time to kind of move on to another guitar.
Which is just crazy.
Yeah, because of course we would have loved if he would have continued to play it, but he was a Fender endorser, and you have to think about this fact that this guitar was not indicative in some ways of what Fender was.
But
making.
I mean, literally, folks, they're almost flat with the fingerboard. I mean, I'm trying to get it. I've zoomed way in on it, and I'm doing a decent job of showing, but it's like, that's craziness. That's crazy town.
Yeah, they're gone.
But then,
yes, in '69, Fender gave James this guitar, and I'm sorry, we've got more clam bake going on, but you can see, this is very normal for this era guitar to have all these cracks in it, because this is contact paper that was put on the top and back, and then they would burst the sides. And so the adhesive underneath it would come loose. Lots of modifications to this guitar.
yeah, we are actually noticing, or Zach noticed first. I'm going to try and I actually have it on camera here. If you see, look at the bridge pickup. There's a split in the middle, and more indicative of the Red Rhodes modification. Red Rhodes was known to use copper, which is weird.
Yeah.
That's not a normal,
And he was the hot rodder. He was the hot rodder in
So
LA.
you see the bright copper windings on the bridge pickup, which indicate that it was indeed rewound and worked on by Red Rhodes. But also look at the gap. Talk about that.
Yeah, the gap, it's got to be two different coils.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's a humbucking effect, but what James told me when I spoke with him, if you see the switch that's in between the volume and tone controls with the white tip, he told me, he said it would give it a boost and make it sound more like a humbucker. So that makes complete sense.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so as you can tell, this looks like a completely new pickup because it's flat pole, which originally this would have had a staggered pole pickup.
Exactly.
So this is
So what happened to the original pickup?
Who
Lord
knows?
knows. Yeah.
So now, I guess going on with the modifications, you have this is a Schecter or Goto bridge. So it's 6 saddle, This was put on. Yes, this was put on in the early 1980s. It's brass and chrome plated. The original ashtray, or the original 3-saddle bridge, was only on the guitar for a couple of years, and then he went to a 6-saddle bridge, but that still had the sides to it. And then this bridge was put on in the early 80s, most likely by John Carruthers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you have the switch tip is changed, which it's funny. These two guitars, it's almost like that could be the switch tip that goes with the 52 for all we know.
For all we know.
But those are flat top, knobs. Of course, we already mentioned the switch. Nothing unusual about the pick guard or the neck pickup. The neck is a replacement. This is not the original neck. This is a satin finish James Burton model neck. When they started making the signature models in the early 90s, or actually I think it was 89, they made one of these for James just to put on this guitar because, again, the frets were worn out and he wasn't going to pay for a refret. No offense, James. But he, because he was a Fender endorser, and so he could just tell him, give me another neck. And so that's what they did. And so they did put a 70s, or late 60s style logo on there, but you can see it's missing any of the serial numbers or anything that would be on there.
And just the way it looks, you can tell when you're looking at it, like there's just no age on it. The frets are huge.
Yeah, these are medium jumbo frets, which are what's on the James Burton signature model. Two string trees. And then those are Kluson machine heads. Those are not F tuners, which would have
been on the original.
But of course, they won't even reissue F tuners at this point. So, very, very cool guitars. And to get to come here with my buddy JD, real treat. Because to me, these are the guitars, especially this one.
Yeah.
This is the greatest Telecaster of all time.
I mean, it's the reason why pretty much anybody ever wanted one. How you doing, folks? It's pretty crazy to see this in person. Because really anybody that ever wanted to play a Telecaster, whether it was, somebody like Robbie Robertson who was going to have to play Suzy Q or something, or obviously all the British Invasion guys, and later on in the 70s, it's just every Merle Haggard record. It's just crazy. So cool. So I don't know when he's going to put this together, but these are literally only going to be here a few more days at the Musicians Hall of Fame.